The first thing that we can draw from the attribute of God being self-existent is that only God is self-existent. Just a few statements of fact that God exists in and from himself. He does not owe his existence to another. He does not depend on another to sustain him. He is truly self-sufficient. His life is underived and inexhaustible. So those little cluster of facts that we're talking about God being self-existent, the first one that we're looking at now is that only God is self-existent. So on the screen we will see the words, only God is self-existent. His self-existence finds its expression in the scriptures in the name Jehovah. When Moses met with God at the burning bush, God revealed himself as, I am who I am. Moses said, who is it? Who am I talking to? And God says, I am who I am. When we think of ourselves in contrast to this incommunicable attribute, we think of ourselves and we think of all the things that we need to exist. We need food and sleep. We need warmth. But God needs none of those things. God doesn't eat. He doesn't need warmth. He doesn't need sleep. He needs none of those things. In the Hindu religion, it's quite a common practice for people to take bowls of food to their many gods. They will go to the temple and they will take a bowl of food and they will leave it there for the gods to eat. Well, none of that food ever gets eaten, of course. But this is the way that many people perceive God. They think God is like us, that he needs food. He needs things that we need to sustain him. But the true God is self-existent. We don't need to bring those things to him. Paul, in the Bible, in Acts chapter 17, not our Paul, but Paul in the Bible, speaking in Athens, he said these words when he was involved in a discussion about religion to people. He said, God is not served by human hands as if he needed anything, because he himself gives all men life and breath and everything else. So the first thing that we draw from this incommunicable attribute of God is that only God is self-existent. Secondly, we will see up on the screen there now, that all things depend on God for their existence. The Bible tells us, speaking of Jesus as the Creator, it tells us through him all, that's my emphasis, through him all things were made. Without him nothing was made that has been made. That's in John chapter 1 and verse 3. In Colossians, again, my emphasis on the words all. For by him all things were created, things in heaven and on earth, visible and invisible, whether thrones or powers or rulers or authorities. All things were created by him and for him. He is before all things, and in him all things hold together. Not only is God the creator, but he is also the sustainer. If God were to remove his presence from our world, it would immediately cease to exist. His presence is active, not passive, but only God is self-existent, and all things depend upon him for their existence. Thirdly, there are 5 points. Thirdly, God is truly independent. God is truly independent. Psalm 115, it tells us, our God is in heaven, he does whatever pleases him. Our God is in heaven, he does whatever pleases him. Now normally when we talk about people and we say they do what they want, they do what they please, we normally think of it in a bad light. That's because we are fallen human beings. The decisions we make aren't always good for ourselves and good for other people. But God, because he's perfect, when he does as he pleases, it means that it's a good thing. It means that when God does as he pleases, it means that he's truly independent of man's thought and man's will and man's pressure upon him. Our decisions in life, depending on the circumstances, of course, are very often influenced by people around us. We have to take into consideration people's thoughts and people's desires. It's called compromise, and very often in life we have to work through certain situations with compromise at the forefront of our thinking. But not God. Because he is self-existent, because he does not depend upon people for his very being, God can do as he pleases. And because he's perfect, and he will always do the right thing in our lives as individuals, everything that God does is always, always for our good. God can do as he pleases. Sometimes people, and perhaps we've all been there at some point in our lives, we like to think of ourselves as independent. We're independent, we do our own thing, we're not affected by anyone else. But the reality is that true independence in this life is an impossibility. We are all connected to other people, whether we like it or not. We're all dependent on other people, whether we want to accept that or not. Even apart from our dependence upon God, we're still dependent upon each other. And we can trust God because he alone is truly independent. When God works in our lives, when God does something in our lives, when we read about him in the Word, there's no ulterior motive. He's not the politician who wants our votes to get elected. The elections are coming up in a few weeks' time. When God declares something, it's the truth. We can trust it. We can depend upon it because he is truly independent. Fourthly, drawing from this attribute of God, we can see that God is immortal. Many people would love immortality. We have memories of growing up as children. And I can remember, for some reason, every time I think of the word immortality, or I hear the word or read the word immortality, I go back to some time, it's like a little trigger. I go back to some time, I must have been about 7 or 8 years of age. It was in the 1960s, and I remember watching a television program. It was a film, a movie, and I can't remember who it was in it, really what it was about, but I remember these people had found this sort of vase with some liquid in it, that if they drank it they became immortal. And I remember being sort of gripped by this sort of part of the film where these people were desperately trying to get to this water, this liquid bowl, whatever it was in, to drink it so that they could become immortal. And I guess within man, there is this fascination with immortality. There is this desire to hold back the years, to stop the years from catching up with us. There is this desire to be immortal. But the bad news is, if we're trying to stem back the years, if we're trying to walk the path of immortality, the bad news is only God is immortal. The good news is we can share it with him. We can live forever with him. But the bad news is that of ourselves, of our own actions, we are very, very mortal, and our lives are very fragile. Only God is immortal.